All right, so just a moment, I think it's going. Okay, so today our topic is working with your team remotely. It continues on some of the other work that we've been doing over the past calls. It was a natural progression based on a number of the things that had come up in previous calls, and particularly around our last call on how people are working together. What we did, we spent, the steering committee spent some time thinking about this, and where we really wanted to go towards is we didn't want to take the quick dive into the tools. We knew that would be an easy one. But instead, we really want to spend time discussing remote support and how you make it work, particularly around with your team, and how have your objectives with your team around teamwork and collaboration shifted, given the remote work requirements that many of us have and some may no longer have. How effective has this been? What would you do differently? What has surprised you? And then we'll also talk about tools and methods that you're currently using. I think with that, I'm turning it over to Amy, who will warm us up with a pre-start poll.
Bob, can you make me a co-host so I can share my screen? Thank you. While you're doing that, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Amy Neeser. I work at UC Berkeley in research IT, and I'm on the steering committee with Bob, Claire, and others. Great, thank you. So we're gonna do a little polling activity to get folks warmed up. So you could either grab your cell phone or another tab on your browser. And I'm going to ask you to please go to menti, MENTI.com. It's up here at the top. And when you get there, you'll be asked to enter a code, and it's right here. It's 717789. And the question we would like you to respond to is, how successfully are you collaborating with your team remotely?
This is like the stair step of happiness.
Totally.
Oh.
Wow, looks like a lot of folks are doing well. Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Next. So same thing, menti.com, 717789 if you're not already there. And please type in what aspects of working remotely are working for you. Looks like consulting's going well, tickets, collaboration, training. This is great, everyone. So I'm seeing folks finding it easy to communicate this way, troubleshoot, meetings, onboarding. That's fascinating. Okay, thank you very much. And then the next question I would like you to answer is what aspects of remote collaboration are not working for you? What are you finding difficult in this time? I'm seeing Zoom fatigue here. Makes sense. Brainstorming. Seeing a lot of work-life things in here. Exercise, family. Wow. All right. Thank you all. So with that, and you can absolutely keep entering those in. We will share these out later. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And let's open this up for discussion.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. We wanted to do something kind of a little different to start people thinking about our topic today, which is last meeting, as Bob said, we talked about remote support specifically, and we wanted to turn the focus back on ourselves a little bit and how we're working with others in general, whether that's managing a team or just with your colleagues within a group. And so our first discussion question is on page 4 of the call document. So if folks want to take a look and start typing in answers if you have ideas. For the question, irrespective of tools, how have you adapted your communications with your colleagues in this 100% remote work day? And how has 100% remote work changed team dynamics? So we just want to kind of get at generally what has changed, what has both like what you do and like how the team functions a little bit. And yeah, Jana, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so, you know, we all had to make a really big shift suddenly. At Northwestern, it was 11 weeks ago. And at first, I think there was a period of like shock. So there was a very unproductive window of a couple of weeks while we tried to figure out, for me, just figuring out where in the house I was going to have an office and how to manage working from home in a productive way. And I will say that I think that's gotten a lot better. Regarding the team, I find that I've had a lot more communication with my very close team. I mean, we get together multiple times every day, I'd say. But then larger team communication, I think, has dropped off quite a bit. So the people who we shared office space with, and just sort of would have casual conversation with, or just over here, like, oh, you're doing that. That level has kind of dropped away. So I'd say things are getting kind of narrower and deeper. And I also mentioned Zoom fatigue. That's something that we have not resolved in any way yet, but I think there were like a whole lot of meetings that got put in at first to help keep that communication alive. And now I think we're starting to see that that's not working perfectly for everybody. So how can we do that? Do we do some calls without the video? Do we just try to manage more things through email or through some of the chats?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Jana. Does anyone else have similar experiences to share about like how many meetings you're scheduling or not scheduling to stay in touch, or this phenomenon of being more connected to some people but more disconnected from others? Just throw your name into the chat if you'd like to share. Or
yeah, I have to say, you know, when you're just sitting here doing this continuously all day, it seems like meetings just start sliding in, you know, and they don't stop. So I think a part of the Zoom fatigue thing is Zoom fatigue, but it's also that somehow we're suddenly more available, you know, and we can do Zoom meetings at the drop of a hat. So
yeah, so they just kind of
experience that.
Pop up like mushrooms. Yeah.
I think part of the problem that happens with Zoom is you're missing a certain bandwidth of communication that you would normally get through facial expressions and body language. And without that, you have to work harder to communicate and to pick up on signals. So I actually think a Zoom meeting can actually be more exhausting than a person-to-person meeting.
Yeah, So it's definitely something to watch out for. Bob, go ahead.
I was gonna say,
Fact.
go ahead, Rick. Sorry. I was gonna say, I second that. I mean, I think there's something unfortunately too conducive about going from one meeting into another without getting up to stretch or walking to another building or something that actually gives you that physical break and that sort of mental delineation of one meeting to another. And I think trying to, take the time to do that is important.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can invite Josh to speak for a minute. Josh, you're talking about daily Zoom coffee chats. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a daily 9 to 9:30 Zoom meeting set up that people can drop into and just get FaceTime on non-work issues. And that was hugely successful during the first month of the lockdown, but has become less and less attended. So we had originally had, somewhere upwards of 75-80% of people getting on that call when we started. And we're down to, there might be 3 to 4 people per day in it now. So I think there's a bit of fatigue going on, but when we've had those times, it's been very good. We've also have a 5 o'clock on Friday optional happy hour call, and that actually is well attended and sort of a nice way to catch up with everyone. The weather's turned so everyone can sit outside, and just makes you feel a little bit more connected, especially since you only really interact among your projects at our group. And so I'm in contact with 4 to 5 people every day, and the rest of them, if it weren't for those calls, I would never get to interact with.
Yeah, Cal, I saw that you mentioned a happy hour as well. Do you want to share about your group's experience, or like a social weekly thing?
Yeah, I don't know how long the tradition has been, but Wednesday afternoon has been a meeting at the on-campus pub known as Scope Creep. And some of us are regular attenders, but since we've moved Scope Creep to Zoom meetings, we've had maybe 3 or 4 times the number of attendees. And I think that's a measure of how we miss that interaction. And it certainly is it's a great feature. The other thing, though, that I observe about Zoom is that we've done a lot of Zoom meetings. We were heavy users of Zoom beforehand. And I mean, I've been in meetings where suddenly we realize from looking at everyone's backgrounds that 9 people are in a Zoom meeting and we're actually physically in the same building, just not meeting in person. So with that together, the thing about the current situation is that everyone is on Zoom, everyone is equal. When we had hybrid meetings, a bunch of people in a room and 2 or 3 people jumping in on Zoom, we ignored those people. So this actually, I think, is preferable to, it's an all or nothing thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, Cal, because I've had similar things in running online training where like some people were co-located and some were individual on the call, and it's really challenging. So in some ways, there's some advantages to have everybody in the same boat. Yeah, Jana, do you want to?
I was wondering, Erin, if you could speak to, you're talking about having a virtual Zoom front desk that runs Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And then Erin wrote that it was staffed by undergrads and a staff supervisor. I'm interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah, so at Berkeley, I work at a place called the D Lab. We do a lot of stuff around data science, and we have a front desk in our physical space where people come in for workshops if they need help and things like that, or consultations. When we went all remote, my first impetus was to keep our students working, and all their shifts that they had scheduled on their physical front desk, were like, you know what, just to make their lives a little bit more stable in all this instability, let's just create a Zoom that they connect to for their shift. And even if they do nothing at all, it'll do 2 things. One, it'll just be a place where people can come together and just kind of have a little, community like we had. And then it evolved. It's like, okay, so now we have all the students here like we would in the physical space, what can we have them do? And so we started advertising this. So when our workshops were starting and people were trying to install, Python modules or R packages and having problems, they would leave the Zoom workshop and come over to the front desk and we'd help them out. And now people drop in and out, anytime throughout the week. And this is becoming, a fixture for what we're doing. And there's kind of a crossroads now. People bump into each other. So we have our staff meetings in a breakout room. And just like you bump into somebody in the hallway, you can now bump into somebody coming in and out of the front desk area.
Oh. So how widely would you say that your community's been taking advantage of the front desk?
So there's the internal and external community. So we have a bunch of grad students who work for us along with the undergrads. So that's a place where the staff and grad students and undergrads all come together pretty regularly. Like most of our meetings are held there, our consultations are held there. And then people see it advertised in our newsletter and they'll just drop in either from the workshop where they're having problems or they're not sure even how to engage with consulting. So they want to go talk to somebody first. So we've not been trying to publicize it too much and kind of overwhelm everybody, but it gets pretty steady traffic every day between 0 to 10 people on any given day. Oh, you're muted, Jana.
Thank you for sharing, Aaron. That's definitely giving me something to think about.
The one other thing I'll add is I put a link in there. We now have a Minecraft version of the Berkeley campus, and we're going to be doing commencement. And so we're also going to look at how we can connect our virtual front desk into this Minecraft server as a way to engage with students.
That's brilliant.
Some enterprising UW-Madison student definitely recreated like a bunch of Madison pubs in Minecraft or something similar. Oh, some creative approaches here. Yeah, Jana, do you see any other pies you want to highlight?
There's a lot of interesting things happening here, but I'm kind of hesitant to keep going because we have a couple more questions for discussion. What do you think? Should we?
I do want to come back around at some point to how people are, I think, handling definitely one of the challenges I see here is the being overwhelmed. We've talked a little bit about Zoom fatigue, but also too many communication channels, feeling like you're working a lot, not having space between meetings and talking about some strategies, but that's less communication based. I just want to see if any of our later questions.
Well, I'd be interested in hearing from Paula. So Paula, can you tell us a little bit about the Data Squad?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the Data Squad is a group of undergrads. I mean, we're a liberal arts college, so that's all we have. And who I take in projects and I parse them into small bites. So some of the things I'm trying to get right now are, I have a bunch of faculty in psych who want to transfer from SPSS to R. And they're terrified. They don't want to do it. It's awful. Everybody's like, I can't handle R. They start it, they get overwhelmed with the vocabulary. So, you've probably all experienced that side of it. So what I've offered is to have a Data Squad students take their code and their data and convert it into R and mark up the shit out of it, frankly. Just give it incredible buffering with all the text needed. And then I know the languages, so I can go in and say, what the student, I can go in and translate the R language to SPSS language. And, but it's a great experience for the students. So that's one of the kinds of things that we do. We use Trello to manage the little projects. It's the hardest thing to get the students to stay updating their Trello project. But if I go in there and I see nothing's happening on a project, I'll make a comment in the card that says, hey, I'm going to hand this off to somebody else if you don't, if you don't say something about what's going on. And then they go, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to do it. Either they haven't done anything or they haven't told me what they've done. Usually it's the latter. And then we just added Slack because they were insistent on adding Slack. So now we're testing that out. And for the students who love Slack, they're putting all this stuff in Slack. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. It's got to be over in the project as well. Put it in the card. So we don't have a bazillion Trello boards. We have one board and each project is just a card, which means it's forcing Trello into into a thing that it doesn't normally do really well, but it's enough. We tried Jira, we tried Asana. Those were hideous, absolutely hideous to get students to integrate. Because if you live in that interface, it's great. But when you have a zillion little projects, it's useless. And Trello is good at that.
You said that that Slack, that there was an energy to go to Slack. Was that the students themselves who wanted to add the Slack?
Absolutely, yeah. And not all of them. There were, right, I had 12 in the meeting, and I think it was 3 who were like, we got to go to Slack and we got to do it right now. Because we had been using Google Chat and Google Hangout. And they were, the argument there was that they were already in their email, just keep it there. But I think what happened is that they didn't like that they couldn't have channels. And so they didn't know what to pay attention to, and they didn't pay attention to anything, so they wouldn't answer, and it was a little awkward. So I think I am optimistic about Slack, but I find that I'm having to maintain a kind of old person rule structure. Like, no, this communication goes in this channel, just to help them understand the content that they're dealing with, right? Because they're just not old enough to know that these are different things. So one of my goals for them is to learn data lifecycle. And now that reproducible research is buzzy, they know that they're supposed to do that, and nobody teaches reproducible research. So I put it into the data squad as what they have to do.
You know, part of what I'm hearing is kind of a proliferation of tools, and how tools today, like we don't anticipate that somebody's going to need training. So I mean, like sitting down to Trello, I'm sure there wasn't like an HR 1 hour how to use Trello. It's like, okay, you just do this. And then there's so many different ways to communicate, and then communicating in the right channels. I mean, I think you kind of highlighted that as maybe an office maturity concern, but I think that's something a lot of us experience. I know my team has a Slack, has Teams, has tickets, email, and there's sort of an office culture about what goes into each channel, but it's adding a layer of complexity.
Yeah,
it is. And that's why I have to really get a grip on the data squad, just so that they recognize, or first of all, we don't lose it in the chaos, which is constant. You have to have a high level of tolerance for information chaos to do this kind of work. But we've been doing it for a while, so going into shutdown or lockdown didn't change a lot. And what I made in the comment was it has improved our work style to stop having physical meetings. Because now they know it's only going to be 10 minutes long. And they're in and they're out and we're done. And it's great.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Christina, did you have someone that you wanted to call on yet?
No, I thought we could go ahead and move on to the next question, because we've addressed some of this already, I think, but just if anyone has any specific things to add about our other discussion question, what new approaches or changes in thinking have you made to supplement, remedy, or strengthen your communication? That would be great. Or if there's a topic that you shared about for the previous question that we haven't gotten to yet that people think might be relevant for the group, feel free. Bob, can I call on you to talk a little bit about what you're sharing there?
In the second question, you mean? Yeah, so
Yep.
This sort of comes a little bit out of what Claire and I were as we were thinking about trying to shape this. We didn't want this to be a tools discussion, which is great because we're not talking all around it. And one of the things that was apparent to us is that for those of us who are managers and those and even those people who are working on teams, is really how are we thinking differently so that we can actually be happy with remote work and not having that face-to-face all the time. And for me, I think it's I've been very lucky with my my managers and the leadership that they've given me a long leash, and I do the same thing for the people that I work with. But at the same time, I don't want them to feel isolated. So, I'm doing more frequent check-ins and asking, how are you doing? And, and even being a little more inquisitive about what are you doing for fun? Just sort of trying to make sure that, that because I find that I'm working more hours than I normally would, those commute hours is, I forget who here, I +1'd. Not having the commute is wonderful, but that means I'm spending a little more time working. So, if I'm doing it, likely others doing it. So I wanted to really see how others on the team are working and hoping to not work. But then also making sure that they have enough flexibility in how they work, that if there are other demands in the house with, kids who are, schooling at home or childcare or whatever, that they have that capability. So taking a couple of different approaches for myself and really encouraging that in my team members to make some structural changes, if you will, and mental changes.
So I have a question to follow up on this. At my office, we practiced core hours back when we were in person. And that was, from 10 to 6, there was some understanding that, you might on a certain day come in a little later or you'd want to work later, but there were core hours. But now that we have people on the team who don't have childcare, for example, it seems like people can they can't predict their work day as well. Have you noticed your team adapting in that direction?
Yeah, indeed. In fact, actually, it was my boss, who was our senior director, who just said, I know there's a lot of competing things for your attention, and I think even HR just came out and said, as long as I think there is an official HR policy, as long as you're working at least half the day, then you've done work for the day. Because of the fact that people do have these demands at home. So I think it was great having an official policy coming from the school on this, but I think he himself was very forthcoming and said, situations change, work when you can, and we know that you're giving your all as you can, so.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Sid, I'd like to hear a little from you about I saw some of your comments before about just the greater intentionality about reaching out and connecting with people, and would you be willing to share?
Sure, thanks, Christina. Yeah, I think that, our team is really small, and generally our offices are very closely connected in the same hallway on campus. And it's been, it's required sort of a conscious effort to stay connected to some of those team members that I may not be engaged with on any particular priority work item currently. So just, reaching out and saying, hey, how's it going? What are you busy with? And do you need anything? Or, just to check in and see, how they're doing, or just say hi. Those times we run into each other in the hallways, or, just coming and going from our offices, sometimes result in the best conversations and the most productive ideas. So I'm kind of missing those and trying to find ways to spark those kind of interactions.
Cool, thanks, Sid.
Mm-hmm.
On that topic of casual interactions, I'm finding I really miss that with my researchers too. And just trying to think of, someone mentioned, I think actually that was Paula mentioned about how the students know that it's a 10-minute meeting. I want to introduce 10-minute meetings into my calendar. Somehow I have this habit of like, oh, a meeting has to be a half an hour, an hour, but just make them shorter.
Yeah.
Well, if they're too short, then you can't read what they're about because they get squished.
Oh, yeah, right. So that's the other part, defensive calendaring, blocking off an hour, making sure you have the time for lunch, or like after teaching, I like to block out 90 minutes to just go flop around somewhere because I've usually spent so much energy, right? I'm trying to learn to be better about managing my calendar for sure.
Yeah.
I was just in another meeting where we were talking about best practices for wellness, and someone suggested that, and they've tried this and it seems to be working for them. So I'm going to implement it in the coming week, making 1 hour meetings 50 minutes and half-hour meetings 25 minutes, because that, and really holding to that, because it gives everybody who's in the meeting a little bit of transition time to the next one, or and it just kind of holds everybody to a boundary that otherwise doesn't feel, for some reason, if we set an hour, everybody feels like we can go 1 hour and 10 or whatever, right? But if you actually make it kind of an odd number like 50 or 45, people actually are more inclined to respect it. Of course, you have to manage the meeting really well, but the trade-off seems worth it.
Annalee, you made me think of something. I'm going to put a section at the end of the call document where people can contribute links. Like, I know our business school, around organizational behavior and management has put out some things on, wellness, Zoom fatigue and stuff. But I encourage people to list links that they have at the end of the document. We can get those out to people as well. So thank you for a great idea there.
To follow on Annalee's comments, I've found that people are getting more and more disciplined so that they are doing 45-minute, 50-minute, even 55-minute. I mean, the ones who kind of tend to go over, they just go to 55 and you actually have a breath to drop off a call and start a new call.
Cool.
We got a comment here from Dylan about the issue of core hours. If anyone else is experiencing a disconnect on when those are, for example, he's a morning person and other people in the team might be the evening persons. So anybody has any comment on that?
I mean, I can comment. Our group has always had kind of, you're supposed to work 8 hours, but you can choose. So I have colleagues that work like 10 to 6, and I prefer to work more like 8 to 4:35. And I think we just make sure that important connection points are set in that overlap. So if I want to talk to my sysadmin, I don't set that meeting for 9 in the morning. But yeah, I think that could happen virtually or not, is what I'm saying.
Well, and Christina, what that makes me think is that you have to kind of know your office culture now, since the core hours have kind of spread out. So you kind of have to know who is when.
Right. Yeah. It's built into our team calendar, actually. So you can kind of see who's available when, but maybe not everyone has that.
And you're still adhering to that now?
For the most part, I think. Yeah, this meeting has given me some great ideas, though, about checking in a bit more with my colleagues about their time and how they're doing in terms of managing their other commitments and their work schedule. So, yeah.
Christina, should we jump into our next poll question?
Yeah,
I think that might be a good transition.
That would be a good transition. So,
okay,
take it away.
Happy to share again. Okay, so if you could go back to menti.com, we're still using the same code 717789. Could you please tell us what percentage of work you and your team are able to get done while working remotely?
And I think the 100% is really 75 to 100%.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, somewhere in this, the idea of either degraded capability or enhanced has to come into it. And I'm thinking not too many people find this enhances their work. So yeah, we kind of bang it all out somehow, but maybe not the way we'd like to or in the most ideal way.
I'll add to that too that, I'm speaking for my spouse, the transition to remote work was difficult because of the fact that not a lot of stuff was online. And so trying to transition to online has occupied a significant fraction of time you know, preparing things to get out to people, etc.
You know, and I'm wondering now about how much I'm prioritizing work that I can do remotely and sort of pushing off work that's not going to be that easy to do remotely, and I'm going to have to eventually come to grips with that.
Yeah. Thanks for that poll, Amy.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I'm hearing is it looks like we're you're trying to unshare.
Yeah, can you help me unshare? My Zoom screen's going crazy.
That for the most part we're being pretty productive, but there's differences. There's maybe a different focus in our work. The differences in productivity may be more about other circumstances in life. You know, we may be getting it done, but it may be a lot more unpleasant. That there's a lot of qualitative aspects behind that quantitative question. So I wanted to circle back then. This isn't our next discussion question, but sorry, I'm hijacking the agenda. Is what strategies have people been using to cope, honestly, with having more competing demands, working at home? I think that's part of this discussion. We've talked a lot about the specific communication strategies we've used in our groups. But if people have thoughts in the chat, even if it's something as simple as like, I don't know, an app that reminds you to stand up and stretch your wrists or something, I'd love to see some of those suggestions from this group. And then we can maybe go on to our next discussion question, but then I just love to get people's ideas, because I think we're all dealing with this. And so community sourcing solutions would be something we could do for each other. Scott, I'm getting a lot of background noise and not your voice. I don't know what that's about. But I guess related question is, how has institutional support or lack of support affected your approach to day-to-day productivity? And are there any resources from your institutions? Is kind of what Bob was referring to.
Is it any better?
Yes.
Helps if you actually plug a microphone in.
Success.
I don't know what you were hearing before. I was going to say my university has had an employee wellness, like a couple of yoga sessions a week that were face-to-face, and they continued those via a Zoom. It just makes a nice break. So once a day I can take either a 45-minute or a 50-minute to not work, you know, see some other faces, and you just take that break.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin, UW-Madison has the Center for Healthy Minds led by Richie Davidson, and he's been doing like regular meditations, I think, just for the community at large. Other contributions from folks, resources from your universities, or other tips and tricks? Yeah, Aaron.
Yeah, one of the things that we're planning to offer here in the summer, there's a program called Search Inside Yourself that I've been teaching. It actually is connected with Richie Davidson and the work that you were just talking about. It's about training emotional intelligence and mindfulness. And that's something I've considered offering to this wider community now that we can do that virtually. And so if there's some interest in that, I'd be glad to share more.
Great, thanks, Aaron.
Aaron, would you offer that to your staff then, or?
So we'll do it virtually. It's a 2-day program, but we have now a virtual way to do it over 2-hour chunks over like several days.
Oh, cool.
And that's something that to this whole CARC and Campus Champions community, you know, now that we're not physically based, we do have time zone constraints, of course, but that's something we may run the program several times, both here at the Berkeley campus, and I may offer it for free to the whole, you know, Campus Champions and CARC communities if there's some interest there. I'll put the link in the chat.
One of the topics that's coming up is equipment for home offices. I think probably, well, so I know for me, I had a laptop, I had 2 offices, and each office had a large monitor. So for me to be able to be at home, that required a monitor right away, which Northwestern helped me out with. And it looks like, but that's really been kind of it. So I have the laptop and I have the big monitor, and then everything else, like the computer stand, I just bought on Amazon, and the little lamp.
So we're getting a big shout outs to good chairs in the chat here. And yeah, I'll say, I don't know if one of my colleagues, Sarah, has been doing impromptu consults with people about their work at home situation to make sure that you're not typing like this or craning your neck, or, you know, my laptop is sitting on a former shoe rack on my desk. So, you know, there's all sorts of options available. Also seeing a lot of chat about dedicated exercise time. Does anyone want to speak to that? Either sort of what you're doing or resources that you found helpful? Just feel free to chime in.
Well, I can share partly because my daughter is, well, hopefully going to be playing a sport at college in the fall. She's a senior in high school, and so we'll all have to see about that. But she plays a fall sport, so has to get in shape for that. And that's hard to do in this situation. So she's signed up for this app called Center, CENTR, and it gives you meditation, it gives you a workout, it gives you menus for cooking meals, and other kinds of guides. And there's been a lot about, you know, wellness in this kind of pandemic situation as well. But the workouts are really nice because the longest one I think is like 35 minutes. They're fairly intense, but they don't require equipment either. So you can do them at home basically with body weight and whatever you've got around the house. It isn't free, but we've found it to be really beneficial. So having a structure for her to follow that isn't me, because I'm not a good structure for my daughter, that works really well.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Annalie. If you can put a link in the document, that'd be awesome.
I want to hear a little bit more about something Janelle mentioned about using an office phone integrated with Microsoft Teams. Can you speak to what that's been like? All right, so does anybody else been doing office phones at home?
Yeah, we have, Harvard actually has Jabber set up. So, and since it's with voice over IP, we can actually control how the phone system works. So I can actually make phone calls from my computer, and I don't have to use my cell phone or my home phone. So it's been a little easier to manage that, but I found, you know, most of us who do research computing work, or maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I don't get a lot of phone calls. So it's easy that I don't have to worry about one more thing.
Hello. We had gone to Microsoft Teams in the fall, coincidentally, and they took away my desk phone. So I had time to practice on that right before this broke out. And so in order to get my office phone calls, I to speak as though I'm at my office. All I have to do is make sure that my Teams app is open on my home computer, and it works just the same.
That's really handy timing that you started doing that right in advance. But that's really good to be aware of. But I do want to second what Bob said. It's true, I don't actually get many phone calls. I just think that if I ever got one, I would like to know how to get it. But thank you for sharing that, Chet.
Yeah. All right. So these are a lot of great ideas. Thank you for everyone who's been chipping in the chat. I love seeing all just the variety of ways that people are moving around, setting up their workspaces. I think those are things we can, to some extent, control and help at least take care of ourselves. Whether or not it affects our work productivity, I think is secondary. I think what's important is taking care of ourselves at this time. So thank you all for sharing your ideas. Jana, do you see any other notes or questions you'd like to touch on that we didn't address?
I wanted to just really, we don't have a whole lot of time left actually. So let me just maybe.
I also saw Gladys wanted to say something. So.
Oh, Gladys, would you please share?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment. I don't know, I think that some of you might be in that situation or hear about it or encounter it, but there is a lot of institutions right now that, furloughs or layoff, are in the horizon, right? It's just the nature of what we are. And so different things, and this is something that happened with our team, that, we all fell into a moment of feeling really worried what was going to happen. There were some announcements that were made for the health science community, part of the university, right? And we didn't know what was going to happen with the academic side. We had a meeting with our VP, right? Just to say, well, nothing is happening yet here for us, and if something is to happen, we're going to just, we're working on different projects. So instead of hiring new people, because not new hires at all, all is freeze, right? So we can actually move people, the people that we have, to work in these new projects if we get the grant money. But I think that also has affected the way how people work, because we are all already fatigued, in one way or another one, just because, just working from home, the environment, the family, homeschooling for those that we're doing homeschooling too, and everything else in life in general, plus family worries, here or out of the country, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get situations like this that are reality, I mean, how affordable is to continue to have a large team, for example, right? So, or which things can be kept or not. So I don't know if any one of you has encountered that lately. I think that somehow in our team, we are a small group, but still there is that sense of insecurity that we don't know what is going to happen, later on, right, in the next few months. And so I think that also affects the way how you work. You want to become more visible because you want to make sure that everyone sees that you are working, but it's just adding another layer of stress in the days that we are already living in.
Those are really good points, Gladys. Yeah, and I think you've done a really good job articulating some things that many of us are feeling. And I really appreciate too that opposite energy about trying to raise, trying to make sure that your job is considered essential. So you got to keep making those connections, and simultaneously having all these reasons why it's hard to do work right now, and even hard to have that visibility in the first place.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think one of the things I wanted to take away from this call was just knowing, and we talk a lot about work and productivity, but that the more important thing is that we're okay in ourselves. And again, yeah, thanks for everyone to share their points of view. And that, I don't know, I just feel like work is definitely secondary in a lot of ways at this time, and that's okay. And if that's an attitude that we can help share, either as managers or as colleagues, giving people a little bit of extra kindness and compassion, that's definitely an action we can all take, even if we're not in charge. So,
and coming to this call, I find it very helpful to connect with my peers and to see that we're all kind of experiencing similar things.
Agreed.
So I think on that note, we're actually at the point of ending the call. So if you haven't signed in, please do so now. The link is in the chat somewhere. Just a reminder, this call was recorded and the recording will be up soon, and we'll send you an email when that's in place. Today's call topic was working with your team remotely. So grateful for everybody contributing on so many different ways to look at this problem. I learned a lot. And I'm going to be going back and looking through the call document again, and you have access to that as well. So you're welcome to check in on that after we get the chat in. So the chat's also conserved.
Please fill in questions if you haven't. You know, we're going to leave the document open and editable for a while. So go back and fill some stuff in.
That would be great. I want to remind everyone that up next is a combined systems-facing track call on May 20th. So that call is 1 hour earlier in the day than this call is. It's called Student Workers, featuring a community panel on effective incorporating student workers into research computing and data groups. So I'm definitely looking forward to that one. The CARC calendar has connection details if you'd like additional information about that one. Our next researcher-facing call will be on June 11th. We're going to continue to focus on subjects to help us adapt to our brave new world. Oh, that probably wasn't a good analogy, but you know what I mean. If you have an idea for where our ongoing researcher-facing conversation should go next, or somebody who we should be hearing from, please add suggestions to the future call topics document. The link is in the chat, and you're also welcome to email the researcher-facing steering committee. And I just want to thank everybody who worked on the call. So that's Claire, Christina, Wirwan, Martin, Annalie, Amy, Katya, Bob, Dirk, and I'm Jana Nugent. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. I'm really appreciative of your time and contribution.